Tell me, doctor, do you concur? Hi there, I'm Greg Venning, and welcome back to the Questing Chiropractor podcast, where we help you to delve deep into the chiropractic world so you can have transformative success and enjoy an amazing lifestyle. And today we have Nimrod Mueller with us again, and Nimrod brings a deep wisdom and practical philosophy to the fore today. And we talk about the one thing that you cannot succeed without in a chiropractic practice. One thing you cannot succeed without, and that's agreement. Because every relationship you have is based on agreement. So do you concur, doctor, that you need agreement? Well, you got to listen to this one to make sure. Welcome to the Questing Chiropractor podcast. We help you grow as visionary, vital, and capable chiropractors who are always on. We do things differently as we help to elegantly awaken your innate wisdom within. We help you create robust, predictable, and trustworthy practices that serve oceans of people and yet still have free time for yourselves and your families. We use neuroscience to deliver better business results so that you can get greater, deeper, and more effective impact in more ways. We are Questing Chiropractors, and this is our story. Welcome back to the Questing Chiropractor. This is Greg Venning, and today I have Nimrod with me once again. Nimrod, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Greg. Great to be here.
Nimrod, I'm so happy you agreed to be on this podcast today, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, is the power, and I'm going to use the term, the necessity, not even the usefulness, the necessity of good, clear agreements in all of our relationships. Starting with the framework that all relationships are based on agreement. And we can even look from a societal point of view. The thin blue line in society between chaos and order is based on social contracts or agreements. We all agree that here in South Africa, we drive on the left-hand side of the road. You're in Spain, you drive on the other side of the road, don't you?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So if we had to mix those two agreements, we would have carnage on the roads. Yeah. So from a very simple point, almost laughable, but we're going to start from this point of all relationships start from a base of agreement. We agree on you're a human being, I'm a human being.
Yeah.
Yep. Which doesn't always happen in society, unfortunately. But so let's take it very practically in for our questers, our listeners at the moment. A basic level of agreement has to be met for us to be able to deliver care to our practice members.
Yep.
Which is kind of the first level of relationship we look at as professionals growing into the chiropractic profession, is we serve our practice members in front of us. And that first agreement is so important. What would you kind of frame, or how would you kind of frame that first agreement that needs to be done to lay a good groundwork for this chiropractor, practice member, chiropractor client, chiropractor person relationship to get started on a good footing?
Yeah, so we're really talking about the interpersonal space, the space of you and me makes we, which is different to you and different to me, right? So it's this interaction, it's this common values and meaning and shared understanding that we have. And I would say that, beautifully through the chiropractic principles, this starts inside out. So the question I would have for you is, what agreement do you have with yourself? And what agreement do you have with yourself around things like who you are, why you're here, what you expect yourself to do, how you expect yourself to do it, and what sort of impact are you looking to create? So starting with that introspection allows you to have clarity around what it is that you're bringing to this interpersonal space. And without that, there's going to be some levels of contradictions and incongruencies.
Yeah. So if that isn't in place, that leads to the point where the person sits in front of you and presents some kind of complaint or desire. And if you're not on sure ground about whether this is the ballpark you want to play in with the person, you can't really get agreement from them, because you're not starting from agreement with yourself either. You can't say, I'm going to drive on the left-hand side of the road, if you don't know that you can drive.
Yep. Absolutely, 100%. And not only that, but it comes up in practice a lot. So things like, do we have agreement around what times I'm going to see people for first visits? Do we have agreement around how the procedure works for a first visit? Am I going to adjust them on the first visit or not? All of those sorts of agreements come from integrity, that comes from introspection of who am I, why am I here, what am I willing to do or not, and how am I going to go about it? And then how am I going to see that transformation, change, and impact happen around?
So we're defining what we would see as our role in this engagement with the person based on who am I first, and then being able to sit in a space and find out who are they, what do they want, and how much of that is something that that we can play together in.
Yeah, so then I bring myself into this interpersonal space, this space of agreed understanding and common values and shared meaning. And there I start with a state of curiosity to be able to try and see if the other person is going to be in agreement with the rules and responsibilities that I've set up within the framework of my practice. So there's certain roles and rules and responsibilities as well for both parties. And so it's about clarifying those and getting that agreement that is voluntary every step of the way. So that's about mutuality, and it's about communication as well. It's about clarifying expectations and clarifying boundaries. And it's about seeing, well, how can I be flexible within this so that I'm continually seeing if I can serve this person in a way that's in line with what I would love to achieve, in a way that's flexible and adaptable as well.
Now, that's a really big and important concept and frame you've put on that. And for anybody listening, just realize this isn't a huge amount of red tape at the beginning of the first visit. It starts with the question of, how could we help you? And eliciting the information we need step by step, sequentially and progressively in a very logical way through there, where we can then get all that information from the person and from ourselves to then get into agreement and move forward from there. And so it's really a sequence of micro agreements along the way to get into this much bigger frame of agreement about what you're going to be doing together.
Yeah, and I would say, you brought up the how could we help you question, which is beautiful at the beginning of when someone is sitting with us at the first visit in the exam room, in the clinical setting as a chiropractor. But the agreements actually start way before that.
Yep.
Right? They actually start the first time someone is interacting with our practice, whether that's by websites, by word of mouth, by a phone call, by walking into the practice, and what interaction they have. Those micro agreements start there, and they should be really clear, and they should be really supportive of the person so that we're helping them feel secure through the process. So as an example, in my practice and in many practices, when someone turns up for their first visit, the first thing that the CAs do is welcome them at the door and show them through the practice. And that is a process of agreement. This is how we work here. Do you agree to being in an open space practice? Do you agree to seeing lots of kids around your feet with chaos? Do you agree to this being a process that is going to unfold over a couple of visits? There are a lot of those agreements happen before they actually meet the chiropractor.
And you just think about a front desk person, a CA, walking up and greeting the person at the front door, where in most healthcare practices, certainly in Western society that I'm exposed to or have been exposed to and know about, is you walk into a healthcare space and you generally walk up to a glass-fronted, and this was even before COVID, a glass-fronted desk, and you almost get a clipboard thrown at you. Now, if you now have somebody as welcoming as they could be greeting you at the front door, if somebody isn't expecting that or doesn't want that and they just want a dry clinical approach, they can voluntarily agree to not agree to that and move out. And we've certainly had, not many at all, but we've certainly had some people just go, this just doesn't feel like the right place. And we go, fantastic. Could we find another practice that might suit you? And they leave every time with a smile on their face. And we've had referrals from those people who've spent less than 3 or 4 minutes in the practice.
Right. Because you've clarified agreements, right? Those expectations, those mutuality, that communication has happened with a lot of trust and love. And I'd say also, walking into, let's say, a medical clinic that has that glass front, a clipboard thrown at you, that's a process of agreement as well, right? There are
Yep.
expectations there that allow me to know what my roles and responsibilities are within the rules and the confines of this space.
Yes.
It's not judging that. It's just saying, do I deliberately create the process of micro agreements within my practice that are a reflection of who I am as a chiropractor and what I would love to do to expand people within my community.
So let's take a step. I want to go on to continuing evolving agreements in a second. I want to come back to the idea we started with a first level agreement and relationship between the chiropractor and the person they serve. Let's call that the practice member. The second level, as your practice and your professionalism evolves, is you take on a team to help you with more, to empower them, to give you more leverage so you can help more people in better ways. And so say that starts with a front desk person or a CA, a chiropractic assistant to start, or a practice assistant. You then have agreements with them about, before even getting to roles and responsibilities, what the practice is about, what they are about within the practice, and then within roles and responsibilities. And then you can get down to specific procedures.
Yeah.
And I think so often we take on team with implicit, assumed agreements on a couple of those levels, where we then find heartbreak where somebody's not, quote unquote, following the procedure. But it's really because of, you could even put a philosophical difference about the practice and the purpose, and even sometimes life at a much higher level that's coming and is maybe being expressed through this heartbreak at the procedure level. How do you suggest we approach this, if we could idealize it with a new team member coming on board, or if we realize this might be happening, if you're listening to this and you're going, oh goodness, this is me, how would we try to reframe and reapproach those higher level of agreements?
Yeah. You say they're higher level, and maybe because the team is so close to us, we really feel that. But this happens with our practice members as well, right? Like that somewhere along the line, there's been a destruction or an erosion of agreement because things haven't been clarified and expectations aren't met. And that's for me the key thing. What are the expectations? Have we clarified them well? And are we in alignment? Are we congruent? So just like we talked about with the new practice member coming in, that the micro agreements happen the first exposure they have to us, it's the same thing with a CA, right? The first time they see the ad, they respond to the ad, they get an email from you, or a phone call from you. All of those are micro agreements around expectations and clarity. If erosion has happened, and this happens in all relationships, then it's an opportunity for us to come back and to soothe and make the person feel secure and safe and seen. And I think that is so, so important. Remember, you're dealing with a human being. They have their own values, their own vision, their own a way of going about life, and their own narrative in their own life as well, that we have no idea what that is. Sit down with them. Make them feel human and heard and seen and felt for where they're at. That will help them feel safe and secure and soothed, and then open up the conversation with curiosity on how we can come into alignment and congruency that's going to lead to an agreement.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful frame, and it's so useful in so many contexts. Wherever there is erosion, wherever there's a sense of heartbreak or a lack of trust or a breakdown, the first thing is being together as beings and moving from there. So we're being human. We're not just doing a human interaction at that point.
Yeah. And I think, so much of that is stopping the narrative in your own head, and also that authoritative temptation of, let me just tell you what's right. We can do that with our practice members too. And maybe at that point, they're our patients more than our practice members. Let me give you the rule book. This is how it's going to happen. But the thing to do is to acknowledge the other human being and to truly listen, to dive deep into their world, to find that empathy, and then to co-create the response that is going to bring about a future that is of agreement. And that may be together or not, whatever way that is. But that's mutually beneficial. That's mutuality that happens as a result of that process of open communication and trust.
And if we take that exact point of listening with empathy and really getting down to the beingness of that person with you, if we take that back to the interaction with the practice member we were talking about earlier, that's what allows us to allow them to start exploring what their real values for seeking care are, not just a superficial thing that might have brought them in. And they might not be aware of these two distinctions at all. The idea of my back pain is very different from it's stopping me playing with my children, and I don't want to be that person that's stuck in the chair, because we've got a couple of different levels of distinction in that story there. And only by really listening and being present with them do we allow the person to sink down into those deeper levels, those very vulnerable levels. And we don't always acknowledge, oh, you stated that, that's good, because that's too hard at that level. It's just sitting and accepting the beingness that they've then showed us at that level, and then authentically knowing whether or not we can serve and help them to support that level of identity they might want to create. Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on something there. It kind of doesn't really make a difference if we're talking about the people in our practice or our teams or ourselves as well. This is a process of vulnerability that allows that emotion to come through, that risk, that openness, that fragility that allows me to be even more human and give more of myself in the process. And as a result of that, I'm going to find my own way together with you through this. And I think that sometimes, as you said, some of those assumptions that we make about agreements are actually more destructive than taking the moment to stop. If as an example, if someone is coming in, this week I had someone who is really just focused on their sciatica, and they just feel like they just want to be able to walk again, and they can't walk a couple of 100 meters. And I was opening up the conversation about how this actually impacts their life. And we got to the point where they said themselves they can't get onto the floor to play with their grandkid. And so rather than me at that moment saying, well, chiropractic is here for the rest of your life and going to allow you to be able to do all of these quality of life things, my next point was actually, would it be okay with you if I gave you a different perspective about how life could be?
Permission. What permission do I have in that moment?
Yeah. And pause. Stop. Don't talk.
Yeah. And to follow up on that story, what kind of richness came from the pause in that question in that instance?
Well, they started getting teary-eyed and, realized the depth of their fear for the rest of their life, and how that's not what they wanted to, how they saw themselves living the last few decades of their life.
That's powerful. I had a story from this week, actually happened between yesterday and today, of somebody who had completed a phase of stabilization care with us. I was looking after the person, and had done it, moved on to maintenance care, and they'd had a couple of visits, and then they sent us a cryptic message saying that they just wanted to test something, so they were going to leave care for now. So I got curious, phoned the man, and he said he reported that he was feeling weaker in gym after his adjustments for a few days. And he started saying, oh, but I've been under care for such and such time and I'm not getting results. So I had to kind of pause and say, well, if I look back at our notes and our conversations, this is the first time we're hearing about it. So what else is going on? This sounded really interesting to me. And from what I knew about him, it didn't sound accurate. It sounded like a story. So I just said, what else is there going on that I need to know that I don't know right now? And he started again, and I said, not that. What else is there that I need to know? And he went really quiet, and I held the space. And then he came up and he said, it felt like I got palmed off to the other chiropractor because you didn't have time for me. And that was heartbreaking to me. Wow. And even now I get emotional because that was obviously not our intention. He had changed his booking schedule, and I took this back to the front desk and I said, it's not about being right or wrong here. It's about, this is a learning moment for us to figure out that we didn't get a clear yes and a clear agreement from him in that moment. We got a qualified yes. It was just okay for him. Now, it might have been just okay once, might have been just okay the second time, but the third time wasn't just okay anymore for him.
Yeah. I think that one of the biggest reasons people leave care, and maybe, your team leaves as well, is they feel uncared for.
That's exactly what he felt in that moment. He felt uncared for, and that was heartbreaking. And he came in today. We gave him some extra time. We left with a hug together. We reassured him that we love him. We want to serve him. I did some technique things to find out what might have been causing the weakness. We cleared up that concern and then mended that. So the third level of agreement I wanted to deal with today in this call, in this podcast, was we spoke about the agreement with a practice member. We spoke about the agreement with our front desk team. And the last one I want to touch on before we talk about the idea of continuing evolving agreements, which I think is really important for us to finish on. The third one is agreement with potential associates coming on board. And in my experience of dealing with other questions, this is a significant source of heartache and heartbreak, where a lot of people have very negative experiences with associateships, partnerships, employment relationships, whatever it might be. And that's both as the principal and the person coming on as the associate. And so much of it is poorly put forward expectations and unclear, implicit, fuzzy, or completely absent agreements.
Yep. 100%. I think those expectations are really, really, really key. And if we look at how do we get that good agreement, how do we build that trust that is going to be an ongoing relationship, it's about clarifying those and clarifying those for yourself. What do you actually expect of a new associate or a new team member, and of yourself? Your availability, your way to show them how to lead and to become the chiropractor that you want them to be, their commitment and investment in the practice, their understanding of chiropractic, their technical skills around adjusting or around taking x-rays or whatever it is. All of these expectations need to be clarified and need to be clarified within yourself, and then with open, honest, trusting conversation and communication with the associate coming on board and looking for that clear yes.
And if I could take us back one step in terms of the introspection first, is why do you want to bring an associate on board? And one word of caution is, if your primary purpose is to make more money or take more time off, I would urge you to reconsider whether this is the right path or not.
Yeah.
Those might be, maybe could be, some of the benefits that can happen down the line in an associate-driven practice or in associate relationships. However, if those are the primary purpose behind you taking on associates, again, I'm going to urge you to reconsider that as a primary purpose.
Yeah. It's just not, it's quite mechanistic, and it has a very short time frame in its utility.
Yep. And
I think
people feel that they're being used at that point. There's a feeling of I'm a cog in a wheel being used. And at some point in the career, that might be okay. But like you say, that doesn't last for very long, because there's very little human connection, human value, human gratitude, human interaction. There's very little we in this interpersonal space. It's very much you and me in that corporatized hierarchical model.
Yeah, and really it goes back to that industrialization model that we have of a factory in which we have resources that produce an outcome, and this puts the resource into human resource.
Yeah, it's a living cog.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
and replaceable.
And that's a lot of the dissatisfaction we see as chiropractors. We see a lot of our practice members, and I'm sure you can relate to this, listeners all around the world. If they're in a corporate business, their level of satisfaction with their role generally as a whole, I would say, is pretty low. It's pretty rare to find somebody who works in a corporate space and absolutely loves what they do in their space in it, because they're being made to be a human cog. And that's the nature of the model. That's the nature of that corporatism and what it does. So if we want to reproduce that in our practice, I would urge caution. If we want to reproduce some of the benefits of a corporatized model where there's roles and responsibilities and clearly defined policies and procedures that live within a human model and a vision and a purpose that's rich, that's great.
And
There's
not only
value
that,
in that.
there's efficiency and effectiveness, right?
That's what it brings for us, is those
Yeah.
levels of efficiency and effectiveness that a corporate entity is amazing at doing.
Very much, very much. And, you mentioned introspection, which I mentioned in the beginning of this chat. And I would suggest caution to the chiropractors, because this is going to bring up vulnerability. This is going to bring up, if you do it well, it should bring up some level of, oh, this is risky to look at. This is going to cause me to expose something deep within myself that I'm uncertain about. And that is a vulnerable space. And moving through that can be really powerful for us.
It is. And I would even suggest, in a safe way for you, your perception of a safe way is wearing some of that vulnerability with your team on an ongoing basis. It allows them to step forward and it allows them to interact. It gives them some texture in which to hold on to your relationship with them, instead of a very hard, firm wall that has no texture, they have no grip. Then it's very hard for them to infuse their DNA within your space and to feel some ownership and
Yeah.
high levels of love and productivity in that.
Yeah. And, just touching on that corporate model that you mentioned, some studies have shown that the people who actually do manage to find meaning and satisfaction in a corporate life are the ones who are very close to the human change that they cause. So they're not so removed that they can't see the impact on another human being. And I think this is probably such a key for bringing on an associate or other team members, bringing back to that purpose and values that is true and congruent for them. And that allows them to come and be in the practice with their hearts singing.
Beautiful. So let's take it on to this last frame that we've touched on through each of these first three, which is the idea that these agreements are not static. And as Mark is famous for saying within Quest, that agreements are set in jelly. And when we assume that a relationship is based on an agreement and we think it's the same agreement as 5 minutes ago, 5 days ago, 5 years ago, when it has actually evolved, that's a source of heartbreak again for us. And I'm using the term heartbreaking in this a lot because it's not just upsetness. This is very personal to both parties when there is a division in this, and it does lead to heartbreak, and a lot of emotions run very, very high. What would you suggest to listeners is a great way to be aware of the shift in the nature of agreements over time, and to keep with the real heartbeat of that shift and rhythm and change?
Yeah. Well, I think, you pretty much put the first step right out there, which is do not make assumptions. And don't make assumptions that just because what you're doing now is what you've always done with another human being, that they're going to agree to it. A trivial example is some mornings my CA runs off for a coffee at 9:30 and she brings coffees for the teams. And some days my energy is a little lower than others. So I would go to her and ask her to go and get the coffees. Now I could come to her and say, hey, can you go and grab us some coffees? Or I could come to her and say, would you mind leaving the practice and going and getting us some coffees? And one allows her to have the opportunity to be human and make a decision for herself, whether it's the right time or not. Whereas the other one is authoritative and is going to be quite a structure in which the hierarchy causes her to do something. And I think that is so destructive to us when we have those hierarchies set in place, that we are enforcing someone to do something that they potentially, on some level, are not agreeing to do.
Yeah, those power dynamics are so important for us to be aware of, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. Yep.
Yeah, agree. And it's so clear to us in the healthcare, the human potential space that we're in, that the idea of informed consent is really important. It needs to be mutual. It needs to be not engineered. But the idea of and the practice of engineered consent is actually far more commonly done in society. I'm engineering it because you can't disagree with me, so just agree with me and let's move on.
Yep.
Is what happens so often. Okay.
Yep. It's implied rather than actually discussed, and allowed that space for the other person to navigate their own way through this.
Yeah. So let's close this off now for the questers. We've spoken about agreements from the very beginning, how agreements are implicit in all of human society at all levels of relationships. And I would urge you to become curious about the agreements that you have when you walk into a shop and you go to buy something, or you go into a coffee shop. What is the level of societal agreement behind your behavior and their behavior and the rules and the roles that you play in that space? And violating that has some consequences. So yeah, just the idea of being curious and becoming more aware and growing your awareness of the implicit agreements all around us. And where are you engaging in those voluntarily and where are you maybe not? And then bring that into your practice life, bring it into your personal life with children or partners, significant others, friends and family. And just start exploring, maybe to yourself personally as introspection, maybe even asking trusted people who you feel safe with. What are the agreements within this relationship or that relationship or our relationship? For you, Nimrod, how else could our listeners bring this concept to life so they could more deeply explore it and more purposefully execute it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like with everything, it starts with intent. And if my intent is within this relationship, that not only do I win, but you win, and as a result, we all win, that win-win-win, I think that leads us to curiosity and also to a desire to make sure that you are truly feeling like you're winning. I think the other part of it is that we all have an instinct or intuition when agreements are off. And don't just, suppress that feeling, but actually use it as an opportunity to explore, because that little bit of investment at the moment when things are feeling off could actually pay off a lot more than ignoring that and suppressing it and causing a rupture to happen in the relationship that is much more difficult to fulfill. And as you said, come through this with a lot of that curiosity and that wonder, the desire to be flexible and to be respectful, and also to have a lot of empathy and build trust as a result of being clear with yourself, being clear with the other person, and being clear about what they're saying, because sometimes you may think you're hearing something, but actually they're saying something quite different. And it's important for us to clarify the communication received as well.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to wrap this up. So,
well, before you do, I want some footnotes. Because you talked about agreements that happen on all those different levels, and I would first of all invite questers and listeners to two things. If this feels difficult to navigate, Quest is fantastic at this, at clarifying what those sorts of agreements should look like at all those different levels, whether it's with yourself, with your practice member, with your team, with potential associates. It is a big field to navigate. Don't feel like you need to do this alone. We have the structure that supports and challenges and allows you to really expand as a result of doing this beautifully and effectively and gracefully. And the other thing I would say about this is, we talked about those agreements at different levels, and maybe to leave off with a really big idea. What's the agreement that you have with the universe and with your life? Can you explore that and clarify that and come to a win-win-win that as well?
If any of this has been useful for you, and I can't imagine that it hasn't, please consider sharing this with friends and colleagues. I guarantee you there is somebody that you know who needs to hear this. They just don't know that this might be the one that they need to hear. Please consider sharing this.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Nimrod.